Forgot to hit record. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us today for the first of our webinars on land politics and sustainability, organized by the DSA Land Politics and Sustainability Study Group. So DSA stands for Development Studies Association, for those of you who are not well acquainted with that acronym. So for the first of, it's actually not the first, we've had a first event co-organized with Professor Ruth Hall, and then a second one with a professor of Oxford. And today we have our third seminar with Professor Kojo Amanor. I think we don't need to introduce Professor Amanor. He has really extensively written on land issues in Africa. And today we are having this presentation on redistribution, ownership, investment, and land administrative reform in Africa. So Professor Amanor is affiliated with the Institute of African Studies, University of Ghana. He is a professor, a visiting professor as well at the, sorry, I can't see that. But his main research interests are on the land question, smallholder agriculture, agribusiness, food chains, linkages with agribusiness linkages with communities, capital accumulation in agribusiness, forestry policy, environment, South-South cooperation, and long-term patterns of ecological change in smallholder agriculture. His work combines a focus on changing patterns of global accumulation in agribusiness with processes of social differentiation with communities and struggles over resources in Africa, and a long-term history and political economy dimension. So I am really pleased. Thank you so much, Professor Amanor. We know you have a very busy schedule. So thank you so much for making the time to join us and for accepting our invitation. So over to you now. You have 50 minutes. Maybe we can also just have a quick presentation from the participation so we know who is in the room. Would that work for you? Or do you want to go straight with the presentation?
No, sure, that's fine.
Okay, so if the participants can just say quickly who they are, where they're joining us from, that would be much appreciated. You can do that in the chat box. I see we have Professor Catherine Boone. Do you want to say something?
Hi, can you hear me? I don't think I'm in. Hello?
We can hear you.
Yeah, you're in.
Oh, sorry. Yes. Hi, yes, I'm Catherine Boone from the LSE. I'm very interested to hear Professor Amanor on this topic. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us despite the short notice. Who else wants to? Yes, I'm seeing Sain Zuka from Blantyre, Malawi. Welcome, Sain. We have Babu as well. Idrisu Azindo, Jakun Ku, Lorenzo Kotula from IIED. Lorenzo, do you want to say something?
Oh, thank you so much, Rama. Hello, everybody. Just to say hi. It's wonderful. I look forward to hearing about Kojo's seminar. Sorry, I'm not feeling super well, so I'll keep the camera off.
No worries at all. Patience, do you want to say something? I'm not sure if you can hear me, Patience. Well, maybe we should just start then. Okay. I don't want to put you on the spotlight if you don't wish to speak. So, Prof, you have Babu. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. So, Prof, you have 50 minutes. Over to you now.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rama. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be engaging in this dialogue. So the most recent research I've been doing has been looking at plantation, the development of medium-scale plantations, cashew plantations mainly, but also mango plantations in the middle belt of Ghana, yeah,
Mhm.
in the Kintampo area. And these are the kind of areas, yeah. So unlike on the other farms, what you see is a house being situated within the farmland, usually with modern tin roofs. Yeah. And you can see all this land acquired extends up to where you see the trees at the back. So it's quite a sizable area. And it's been put under mango. And well, in this case, most of the mangoes have been burnt. Yeah. It's not thriving so well. And then here's another farmer. Yeah. Now he came down to the Middle Belt in the 1960s when they started, in the Nkrumah period, when they started the state farms. Yeah, he came in search of labor from the Upper West. And eventually, he ended up farming in the area. So he's been farming there since the 60s. Yeah. But he's a migrant. Yeah. So, but recently the land he farmed has been sold by the chiefs to a medium-scale farmer, yeah. Let's say a town farmer who comes from one of the neighboring towns, Wenchi, yeah. And he has nowhere to go. He's over 70. He doesn't know where he can get land again. He hasn't been to his hometown for many, many years since he's come, yeah. And there he is at a loss with his grandchildren. And the farmer who's acquired the land has allowed him to continue to plant yams as long as he tends the mangoes until such an extent as they're well established, and then he'll have to move from there. And this is a familiar story within the area. A lot of, it's not only migrants who are losing land, also women farmers are another category. We heard lots of stories about women. So women get married into the settlement and they leave their home villages to come and stay with their husbands. And then when a relative of theirs, close relative, dies, they go back to their home, to their family, to their original families, or possibly when they've given birth, yeah. And they say that the chiefs have agents around looking, spying on the farmlands. And when they hear that a woman has gone back because of a funeral or something like that, then they quickly inform the chiefs and they arrange to sell off the land, yeah. At another settlement called Wela, the whole town was established long time ago. I'm not sure if it wasn't even before colonialism, yeah, by people who migrated from the Banda area, yeah. And they've been farming there for a long, long time. But suddenly now their lands are being given out to commercial farmers. Yeah. So this is a familiar story developing throughout Ghana now. And it's not only medium-scale farmers, yeah. There are also large-scale commercial corporations which are getting land from the chiefs. So in a neighboring area in Atebubu, there's a company there called African Sustainable Plantations Limited, yeah. A Norwegian company which gained a 30,000 hectare concession from the chiefs, yeah. And this was situated in an area with many migrant farmers, and all of them are being displaced. And those which continue to stay in the area complain about being harassed by police and military. They say the military come sometimes. They check their fires to make sure. They check their cooking to check that there's not bush meat in the pot. they also complain about, they check their sources of firewood, and they often physically harass them. Yeah. So there's great pressure on them to leave the area. Now, I'm not really surprised by these developments because I've seen them coming for a long time. I'm probably surprised at the rapidity of their development. But I think what surprises me the most is how these developments are being reported in the literature. For instance, in an article in 2022, Jane, who's written a lot on medium-scale farmers, talks about the breakdown of customary tenure systems. Yeah. And in recent years, their abolishment and attempts to transform customary tenure systems into private land holdings. And sure, I agree with that's not in dispute, and customary authorities, traditional authorities, are involved in this process of selling of land. But the new land laws which are being enacted in Africa haven't been enacted from the perspective of transforming customary land tenure, as he alleges, transforming customary land tenure to statutory tenure for support of the rise of entrepreneurial farmers. Rather, they have sought to preserve customary rights. They claim to defend customary rights. Yeah. And they empower traditional authorities, customary institutions to manage and preserve these rights in the name of the people. And if we go back to 2006, an article by Alden Wiley, and Alden Wiley has been one of the main consultants, international consultants, involved in working out new frameworks for land administration, which decentralize authority to communities and traditional authorities. And in contrast with what Jane is writing in the 2020s, Alden Wiley presents the reforms as clearly based on strengthening customary landholders' rights in land, registering their occupancy, and enabling them to get rights in land, which not only allow them not to be expropriated from the land, but also enable them to sell the lands they acquire, they have recognized, of creating individual property rights in customary systems. Yeah. So she sees this as being a great success, yeah, in which good governance reforms and market-driven strategies have brought land into the marketplace and created favorable conditions for the recognition of customary tenure. So this whole framework, which is clearly documented in the literature, seems to be forgotten in the present period. There's an amnesia about it, and the whole history of land administration reform is being rewritten. So what I want to do in this presentation is to examine the framework, to look at the framework of administrative land reform. Yeah. And it's fit within neoliberal frameworks. Yeah. And to trace the relationship between this framework and the main trends in accumulation within the agricultural sector in Africa. Yeah. And to examine critically how customary tenure has been socially constructed within this literature. So the roots of administrative land reform lie in the introduction of liberal market reforms within Africa and the opening up of African nations to foreign and private investments. Yeah. So initially, the initial inflows of investors met several problems with purchasing and registering land, and in turn, interminable conflicts over land ownership. Yeah. So they would often lose their investments in land or wait for years without ownership being clarified. Yeah. So the first attempts at reforming land institutions were attempts to create more efficient land cadastres and more efficient one-stop shops for registering and purchasing land. Yeah, to make the process more efficient. Yeah, and an example of this was the Land Title Registration Act in 1986. Yeah, which prescribed compulsory registration of land for recognition of individual property rights. Yeah. So the philosophy behind that was if everyone registered their land, and it was recorded within a land register, then it would be much easier for investors wanting to acquire land to know who were the bona fide owners of the land with who they could negotiate. Yeah. But 20 years after enactment, only just over 100,000 applicants had received title, resulting from bureaucratic hurdles and costs. And most people preferred to try to gain security in investments in land through erecting residential properties rather than trying to register the land. So this gave way to alternative approaches, which sought to create a more comprehensive system of titling by decentralizing land administration from state cadastres and facilitating the registration of customary rights at decentralized district or community levels. Yeah. And the philosophy again behind this was, again, if you're able to have a comprehensive register of land, then buyers will be able to identify hotspots where there were dangers in purchasing land. So essentially, the reforms were being driven by the interests of investors. A second major influence on administrative land reforms arose in the natural resource sector. Yeah. And from the 1980s, there were a lot of community initiatives within forestry, yeah. Which during the economic crisis sought to empower community structures and customary authorities to take over or participate more in the management of the resources around their community. Yeah. And these concerns were also reflected in new institutional economics, yeah, with an emphasis on the efficiency of community management of natural resources. Yeah. Well, you know, the kind of things for which Ostrom got a Nobel Prize. There was also a second strand of new institutional economic literature outside of the natural resource management, which dealt with sharecropping. Yeah. And this particularly was associated with Stephen Cheng from Taiwan, who accompanied Milton Friedman to China when he went to open up China to American investments. Yeah. And he tried to reinterpret the old modernization theory literature on sharecropping and to revise it. Yeah. Yeah. So in the old modernization theory, sharecropping was considered as an exploitative relationship. And Cheng argued that this was not the case, that it was a relationship which enabled landlord and tenure to share the costs of risk. Another approach in Francophone Africa, which was very influential, was the gestion de terroir, yeah, which sought to develop community management structures to manage the natural resources around community and to develop contracts between communities and state agencies, yeah, which enabled the communities to take over and participate in the management of communities, of lands around the village, yeah. And the gestion de terroir laid the foundations for the emergence of the Plan Rural Foncier, rural land plans in the 1990s, which sought to register all existing rights in rural communities, map them out and digitize them, yeah, and also record areas subject to dispute as part of this mapping out exercise. A third source originated from agricultural sector reforms. Yeah. So prior to structural adjustment, there were growing concerns over the rise of agribusiness, its domination of global economy and impact on the environment. And all these concerns were reflected in the UN, in the new international economic order. Yeah. And also in the framework of the Rutland Report. Yeah. Yeah. And so by the 1980s, a literature began to develop which sought to rebut this and argue that the main causes of agricultural crisis in Africa resulted from internal factors. Yeah. So this was a framework of Bates's work and Lipton's, yeah, on urban bias, yeah, political distortions of agrarian policies by state. and the interests of elites, yeah. And this laid the foundation for the neoliberal solutions of structural adjustment, yeah, which sought to divest state of control in the agricultural sector and divest state investments in agricultural sector and privatize these. So this search for privatization of agricultural institutions also was reflected in land policy frameworks, which now sought to decentralize land administration away from state cadasters and in search of community-based solutions. Yeah. But the roots of the problems which were being addressed were essentially concerned with agribusiness expansion. Yeah. And the central problem was one of agricultural credit and collateral to facilitate smallholder investments in new agricultural technology, yeah, and in land. Yeah. So the main problem in agribusiness in this period is because there were no formal land markets and land did not really have a commercial value. Land could not be used as a lever to threaten farmers who reneged on their contracts and on the loans they received. Yeah. Mm. And this was quite common that smallholders with agribusiness contracts often considered them to be exploitative and either sold to the market when prices were higher on the market than those offered by agribusiness corporations, or they failed to repay interests and the principal on the loans they took. So this wasn't mentioned in these works. So it was essentially articulated within a conception of empowering smallholders, yeah, to gain rights, to be able to value their land assets, to be able to gain credits to participate in agricultural modernization. And another set of reforms influencing these land administrative initiatives originated within civil society concerns. So civil society became important because in many instances, investors were unwilling to invest in bankrupt state agricultural services, yeah. And so rather than allow these to continue to perform, many of these services were decentralized to NGOs, yeah. So several NGOs began running agricultural extension services and providing other marketing and credit facilities to farmers. And this also included support for traditional authorities. So in Ghana, the World Bank provided a loan to the paramount chief of Joa Benin Asante to establish a large oil palm plantation with outgrowers, which were recruited from among his subjects in the 1980s and 1990s. So the framework of land administrative reform began to evolve as a collaboration between new institutional frameworks for reform of the agricultural sector in Africa and international civil society organizations who often, from working within the environmental sector, had developed a communitarian development framework, which was now focused on achieving a new structure to harmonize customary and statutory tenure and to bring customary relations into the market. So a second characteristic of the era of liberal market reforms in Africa was that this coincided with the attainment of independence in South Africa, in Southern Africa, South Africa, Zimbabwe, Angola, Mozambique, etc. Yeah. And the struggle against settler colonization and the struggle for land redistribution. But within the conditionalities of market liberalization, land reforms had to be conducted within a market framework of willing buyer and willing seller, which was imposed as some of the conditionalities of loans. And when these were abandoned, as in Zimbabwe, the government then became subject to sanctions. Yeah. As popular land occupation movements developed in rural areas and began began seizing the land from large settlers. Yeah. And in South Africa, within this framework, land redistribution never really got off the ground in any significant way. So in most of Africa, the introduction of land administrative reforms and the divestiture of state assets have not really led to a redistribution to the rural poor, but from state to commercial enterprises and to agribusiness and their subsidiaries. Yeah. And this whole process of introducing market reforms has been accompanied by increasing concentration of agribusiness within Africa and within the whole world. Yeah. So the recent models of land administration are grounded in market liberal models of governance. Yeah. And as such, they reject a social distribution and a redistribution of land. And what they really do is to favor a reconcentration of wealth. So if we quickly look at the characteristics of the land administrative reforms throughout the continent, yeah. So the first thing is they claim to strengthen customary land arrangements, yeah. But this occurs along a commitment to the expansion of markets and economic liberalization. Yeah, certainly these are not challenges in this framework, as you saw in the quote by Wiley, Alvin Wiley. And they promote decentralization to facilitate more comprehensive registration of rural lands. They recognize individual rights in customary land, including rights to dispose of land through sale and transfer landed assets into finances. but they don't reflect on the contradictions of individual property rights and customary user rights. Yeah. And then they promote the harmonization of customary and formal land tenures. And when these are transformed into institutional institutional arrangements, there are a wide variety of relationships because the countries have different histories, different patterns of development and uneven development and institutional configurations. So in some countries, there are strong traditional authorities. In other countries, pre-colonially, there weren't strong centralized states, yeah. And traditional states didn't form a strong component of colonial rule, yeah. So where there are strong traditional authorities, decentralization to customary authorities can be important. Examples are Ghana in the land administrative project with those customary secretariats. Yeah, that give powers to chiefs as both the sellers of land and the registers of land. Yeah. In South Africa, chiefs also have been strengthened through the communal land rights of 2004, which empowers traditional councils to manage communal land. Botswana, the Tribal Land Act, which continues to exist, creates land boards. Yeah, and these land boards are constituted by representatives from village assemblies and from the ministries, and they are presided over by chiefs. So there we have a combination of traditional authorities and state representatives. In Mozambique, in contrast, the land reform law doesn't define exactly what a community is, or the institutional configuration within the community. It recognizes the local community as a formal legal entity based on its occupation of that entity norm customary.
Prof? Excuse me, Prof?
Okay.
Prof, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Prof? Yes, it's
yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, it's the line is cutting. We can't hear you very well.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was just like a minute. It lasted for a minute.
Okay. Is it okay now?
Yes, it is fine now.
Okay. So you want me to go back over something?
If possible, yes. Just yeah, where you were 1 minute ago.
Okay.
If you don't mind. Thank you.
So we were discussing, so there were institutional configurations where land management came under chiefs. And secondly, under land boards, combining traditional authorities and state representatives. And then in Mozambique, where the community, the land holding community was identified and allowed to define what its customary norms of land ownership constituted. And then in areas such as Tanzania and Madagascar, land comes under village.
Hello? Hello, Prof? Prof, can you hear me?
Hello?
Maybe we should, I think it's a connection, an internet connection problem. Maybe we should remove the video. Maybe you can remove the video so that the line improves. Do you want to remove your video so we can?
Okay.
Yeah. You can keep sharing your screen, just your video, maybe your camera off, if that can help.
Is that better?
Yes, let's try and see. Thank you.
Okay. So in other areas, in Francophone Africa, there's a national register that maps out all existing rights within village territories. Yeah. All existing customary rights. Yeah. And then there are other countries where customary rulers have been overthrown historically after independence or following independence, like Rwanda, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. Yeah. Where the land tenure reforms occur outside of any customary framework. So how does this framework contrast with the land tenure reforms that emerged in the 1940s and 50s under modernization theory, which kind of lays the original foundation in development studies for land tenure reforms. Yeah. So in this context, this emerged in the struggle to contain communism in Southeast Asia, which was essentially how US modernization theory and development was articulated. And in the context of a rising national democratic movement in Latin America. And in these countries, prior to the 50s, there were influential communist parties which had built up strong support among peasantry and introduced forms of land redistribution. So the attempts to contain these and try to win over rural support for anti-communist development led to the development of land reform policies in Japan, South Korea, Taiwan. And these were extended throughout Asia and Latin America. And within the modernization theory context, in contrast with the present day conception, customary land tenure was considered as a pre-capitalist, as based in pre-capitalist relations, which locked up land in unproductive rentier forms. That appropriated surplus capital from agriculture for the basis of a landlord class. So land reform laid the basis for the emergence of a more productive modern capitalist agriculture. and equitable land reform, although it created small holdings, would eventually allow the more efficient agricultural enterprises to expand, invest profits in acquiring more land, eventually resulting in the gradual consolidation of agrarian capitalism. Yeah. However, this commitment to radical land reform did not last long in US agrarian modernization. And following attempts by the Arbenz Guzman-led government in Guatemala to nationalize the land of the United Fruit Company, the US instigated a coup d'etat in 1954. Yeah. And by the late 60s, the main focus in US agricultural development shifted from land reform to the Green Revolution. And here the objective was to promote the uptake of new technology by progressive, richer farmers. And it was argued there would be a trickle down to smallholder farmers who see the gains of modern agriculture, and they would copy it. Now, in post-independence Africa, there weren't these large redistributive state, land redistributive state modernization schemes. Yeah. However, this doesn't mean that there weren't any attempts to redistribute land or protect peasant land. Yeah. And the attempts to protect peasant holdings often occurred through zoning systems that sought to protect user rights in land. An example is the 1964 land law in Senegal, which protects the rights of cultivators by local councils. Yeah. So this officially recognized the rights of those who cultivate the land. And user rights in land user rights certificates are only issued to those who are actively involved in cultivation of land. And once they no longer cultivate the land, the rights are removed. Yeah. So this kind of framework sought to overcome inequalities under customary tenure systems, yeah, that were perpetuated under colonialism, in which the descendants of former landowners continue to control land and extract rent in sharecropping from the peasantry. Similar relations could be found in Guinea under Sequatory, where the rights of cultivators were recognized, rights of tillers, yeah. So this was particularly the case in Fouta Djallon, where the Fulbe had subjugated the Djalonke peoples in pre-colonial times and appropriated their land. And they were forced to cultivate this land and provide a percentage of their yield as tribute to their overlords. After independence, domestic slavery was made illegal in Guinea, and rights of tillers to land were recognized. Similarly, in Côte d'Ivoire, during the expansion of the cocoa in the 60s and 70s, the government offered rights to migrants. Can be seen in the 1950 Rwanda revolution, which abolished the monarchy and redistributed land to the peasantry. And also in the complex histories of Ethiopia and Eritrea. So most of these land reforms that occurred within Africa were based on delineating the rights to cultivators, rather than division of land into fixed plots of individually owned plots. And the main reason for this was that the dominant patterns of cultivation were based on shifting cultivation or rotational bush cultivation. Yeah. So people didn't cultivate fixed areas of land, but farmers tended to farm in a line, moving together, moving up and down until they met farmers farming in the opposite direction. So that's why I think that the main forms of land redistribution and recognition of ownership were based on user rights rather than fixed plots of land, because most people up to 70s weren't farming on the fixed plot of land. Now, it's difficult to make sense of these patterns of land redistribution in the literature, yeah, because many of the regimes that introduced these kind of reforms were socialist inclined. Yeah. Or, yeah, and attempted to engage in social redistributive policies, which have resulted in them being maligned as tyrannical dictators, yeah, as case of Sekou, the Rwandan Revolution, and Mugabe in Zimbabwe, yeah. So there's a tendency for those regimes that were most committed to land reforms and supporting rights of the poor and peasant cultivators to be maligned as dictatorships in the Western media. So, and to follow up with liberalization, many of these reforms have resulted in reversion of customary rights to the previous owners, yeah, and the cultivators have lost the rights of tillage. So in Fouta Djallon, in the 1990s, the customary owners claimed back their lands, ejected the tillers, and there were a lot of violent conflicts over land. Currently, only 10% of population in Fouta Djallon own land, and the majority of land is held by a few noble Fulbe families who engage sharecrop tenants. And in Côte d'Ivoire, following the 1990 Land Code, yeah, which began to record customary land holdings. Then it introduced clauses that land rights were based on autochthony and national identity. And this deprived a large number of the Sahelian migrants who had been allocated land in the 60s and 70s. Yeah, found their land rights undermined. In addition to direct expropriation of land, a second way in which the rural poor lose land and gain occurs as part of acquiring individual rights to land. Yeah. So there's a process of commodifying land in which, as the owners are accorded rights to a particular plot, at the same time, land buyers emerge, commercial land buyers, to whom the rural people are pressurized into selling their land immediately. Yeah. Yeah. So in Tanzania, large areas of land allocated to villages are being sold at low prices to investors. And the bureaucrats and village council elders who are involved in recognizing and allocating these rights, at the same time often collude with investors to pressurize villagers to sell land. Similarly, in Mozambique, there's a rapid commercialization of recognized communal rights in land, in which these rapidly transfer hands, and there's a rapid increase in the price, yeah, as they go from community members to commercial investors. So this results in a gradual process of expansion of investments development of land markets in which very few people in rural communities can now afford the price of land. So if we look at the types of investments that are occurring currently, there are acquisitions by agribusiness transnational corporations through takeovers and acquisitions. This doesn't only include farmlands, but it can include corporations that own farmlands, corporations that have input distribution networks, technological specification, patenting rights, and farmer networks, etc. So the acquisition is a way in which an agribusiness company can expand into new sectors in which they don't have previous experience. Then there's acquisitions of farmland by venture capital and real estate trusts. Yeah. And other farmland linked investments, yeah. Which followed the 2008 food crisis, yeah. Which led to speculation in land. And then there's a type of investments we began with, the acquisition by medium-scale farmers. There are also expansion of urban residential property investments into peri-urban areas, converting urban agricultural land into residential properties. And this is occurring at a rapid rate. And then in rural areas, as land becomes increasingly appropriated, there's an increasing scramble among all sectors of farmers to try and secure land by acquiring land certificates or cultivating plantations as a means of securing these rights. So there's an increasing concentration within agribusiness, yeah. Since the 1980s, yeah. And large number of sectors now come under the control of a handful of agribusiness corporations, which control global production and marketing through mergers and acquisition. And the complex set of subsidiaries, contractual relations, and platforms that bring together a wide range of corporations, NGOs, farmer cooperatives, state services, financial services, development banks, all working to achieve private control and transform agricultural production along agribusiness lines. So the scale of operation in these sectors are large, and the leading corporations are no longer concerned with farmland acquisitions, but they take over whole sectors, yeah. And a good example of this is the cocoa sector in Côte d'Ivoire, where in the 1980s, 3 multinational corporations managed to take over the whole, managed to gain control over the whole state sector, yeah, which controlled over 50% of world production. So this enabled them through this to gain complete control over cocoa processing throughout the world, yeah. And this facilitated an economic crisis in Côte d'Ivoire, which eventually led to civil war. So apart from taking over whole sectors, these linkages between agribusiness and various other actors are also used to set up platforms to build up necessary infrastructure to support the future development of agribusiness. And a good example of this occurs in Ghana, the Global Agri-Development Company, GADCO, which was a rice production and marketing corporation, which developed a 5,000-hectare concession in the Volta region. Yeah. It was developed by 3 entrepreneurs, 1 Nigerian, 1 British, 1 Indian, with Lord Malachi Brown as its chairman. Yeah. And they gained support from German Development Bank, yeah, to develop this community-focused rice irrigation scheme. And the GADCO's business model is rooted in a philosophy of inclusive business models, community participation, and gender sensitivity. However, in reality, the reality is far different from that. Yeah, a study by Lance and several other people shows how the community development project was essentially an agreement between the chiefs and GADCO, in which GADCO offered them 2.5% of corporate profits in 45 irrigation plots for the community. So the participation was largely limited to the royals of the time. And the royals used their authority to appropriate land from migrants and from women farmers, common land, which was allocated for development into the rice project. And when the 45 irrigation plots were allocated to communities, they went to members of the royal lineage. Yeah. So in effect, the project resulted in an appropriation within the community from the poor to the community elite, and from the poor to the commercial cooperation company. So having established the irrigation facility in a rice processing mill, GADCO then developed an outgrower scheme and worked with Wenco, one of the largest input suppliers in Ghana, to build up control over smallholder rice production, yeah, in which GADCO controlled the marketing and processing of the rice, and Wenco the inputs. Subsequently, GADCO has been acquired by RMG Concept, which is a subsidiary of Syngenta. And Syngenta is one of the 4th largest agrochemical and seed companies in the world. Yeah, and RMG not only acquired GADCO, but also the agrochemical division of Wenco, including its farmers association. Yeah, so there was a wing of Wenco which had established farmers associations, yeah, through which it could market its inputs, and this was also acquired by GADCO. So what we're dealing with these strategic interventions, it's not merely the appropriation, the acquisition of farmland, but it's actually a control of community and a control over whole farming sectors. So what I'm arguing is that these policies which claim to strengthen community and customary land rights have been central in bringing about reforms within the agricultural sector, which bring various agricultural sectors in Africa under control of transnational corporations and transnational agribusiness, and which facilitate the commodification of smallholder agriculture, the commodification of land, and the integration of production, agricultural production, into agribusiness food chains. And the land tenure reforms have essentially, which accompany this, have essentially been framed within market liberal frameworks, yeah. And frameworks that promote the interests of agribusiness. And the dominant academic discourses have been ideologically, they present a highly idealized notion of customary tenure, which isn't rooted in historical evidence of inequality or within a contemporary political economy of the rise of agribusiness, but within the framework of protecting equitable rights of communities from a depredatory state. Yeah. And this presents land tenure reforms as a struggle between local communities and exploitative states, and ignores the huge elephant in the room, agribusiness concentration. So these frameworks of land reform gloss over the deep contradictions between land as a use value and land as a commodity value, and present the commodification of land as a property certificate, of land as a property certificate, as the ultimate defense of user rights. However, a lot of the examples we have shown, a lot of the examples that I've alluded to tend to show the opposite, that the commodification of land in the end leads to the deprivation of the rural poor of land rights. And it leads to land markets in which the poor can no longer afford to purchase land. So as it becomes increasingly evident that community land registration reforms are associated with increasing appropriation of land of rural poor and marginalized, there's an attempt to rewrite history and present these reforms as resulting from an alliance between state traditional authorities and local elites. However, in reality, these reforms are deeply rooted in the process of market liberal, the expansion of market liberal ideology. And it's difficult to cover this up because the footprints are deeply embedded in the academic literature. So I think I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this very brilliant and informative presentation. Personally, I have learned a lot, and I think you have really covered all areas of agrarian restructuring all over the continent. I think the examples you've provided from Francophone Africa, Southern Africa, Eastern Africa have been really compelling. So thank you for this example, for this presentation. You have shown how land administrative reform under the pretense of redistributing equitably land among different actors, especially those who are using it, cultivating it, have in reality been a redistribution or concentration in the hands of the powerful. So thank you so much for this presentation. I will now open up the floor. If there are any questions, we will start by taking four questions or five. We'll have a first round of 5 questions, and then we will give the floor back to Prof Amanor for him to respond. So any questions, please raise your hand. Yes, I can see Prof Catherine Boone. Yes, please go ahead.
Good, thank you. Well, I want to thank Professor Amanor really for a brilliant panorama. I certainly hope that this talk emerges out of a book that exists or is about to exist, because I think this history hasn't really been told in this way, and that it would be fabulous to have this narrative in one place. So I actually have many questions, but I would just ask 2. First, on the sort of academic policy discourse about land registration and the strengthening of the rights of ordinary people and the poor and protecting them from dispossession on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the contradictory reality that registration and titling can indeed lead to dispossession. I wonder how the professor thinks about this as, I mean, why does this contradiction persist, or why does it persist as long as it did? And, you know, I think it, in my own mind, this reflects a coalition of dissimilar bedfellows in a way, sort of the more communitarian people finding common cause with the pro-market reformers, a kind of strange alliance of interest pushing in different directions, maybe. But I don't know if maybe there's another way of looking at it. So that's the first thing. And then just secondly, and I hope briefly, another theme that the professor opened toward the end of his talk, which I hope could be a subject of another book, is the changing character of, let's say, the Farmers Association or the agricultural cooperative over time. And the last point, using the GADCO in Ghana as an example, was about a farmers association that formed, presumably, let's say, from the ground up, that then gets, according to what Professor Amanor said, sort of swallowed up within this agribusiness corporate world. And I would just be very interested in hearing the professor's thoughts on what this, I mean, there's some obvious intimation that this completely undermines any political capacity of the farmers as citizens or as producers, but I wonder if he could say a little more about sort of the political implications of this. Thank you.
Alexander, can you hear me? Please go ahead.
I can hear you now. Yeah, I think you were muted initially.
Sorry.
Yeah, like Catherine, I think this has been a really interesting talk. I think that there needs to be a lot more work done on the nexus between agriculture and land reform. So I think this is very important work, and you're covering a lot of ground, which I think is very good and very admirable, because it's hard to draw connections across cases even within the continent that are so different in terms of their histories and in terms of their contemporary experiences. One thing, and feel free to tell me that I just missed this in the first couple slides because I was a little bit late to the talk, that I was interested in a little bit more was the kind of concept of democracy in a way, right? You kind of alluded to the maligning of a number of countries as anti-democratic or authoritarian when they've undertaken kind of real social redistribution in terms of land reform. But I was wondering whether you could comment a little bit more on your conception of the relationship between kind of market reforms, social redistribution, and then democracy, right? Is democracy an impediment to these things? Is democracy something that with a different conceptualization could help bring about these sorts of things? But it is kind of striking in a way that, a lot of the cases that you do mention of kind of real land redistribution that has happened in the past have happened in very autocratic contexts, whether it's post-war Asia, whether it's Latin America in the 19th and 20th centuries. Kind of what role has democracy played in the watering down of these reforms?
Thank you so much. Do we have more questions? We can take up to 5. So please don't be shy. We're here to discuss and learn from Prof Amanor's vast knowledge. Jifa, did you want to ask anything? Jifa? No? Isabel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rama, and thank you, Professor, for this amazing talk. I just wanted to build on Alexander's question about democracy, or more specifically, when you were sort of giving us this overview of land reform and neoliberal reform and these sort of outcomes, you also mentioned these critical periods for instance, independence and then apartheid in South Africa. So these sort of regime change processes or even peace processes to some extent for those cases. So I was wondering what kind of role these changes, political changes, played in the sort of outcomes that you are outlining here. Because when I was listening to your talk, I was thinking about the Colombian case, where we also had a World Bank land management program that was important for ethnic communities, particularly indigenous and Black communities, in the way that this program gave funds for the government to implement collective land titling. But to some extent, I would say that it was redistributive, because these movements had previously influenced the constitutional and legal framework in a way that they had shaped that titling was in a way exclusive, not only for access, but also for use, that the state could not expropriate collective lands for any sort of economic enterprises afterwards. So in that way, these movements used strategically this kind of firm from the World Bank to have any sort of redistributive effect, even though it was not intended in the first place. But it happened in the context of a peace process or peace talks and a new constitution. So that's why I'm quite interested in understanding how these changes in politics also reshaped the frame and also the arena for contestation for the movements as well.
Sorry, I'm not quite clear.
Can you reformulate? Yes.
Yeah, I am just asking what kind of role or how you see how these changes in regimes from towards democracy, for instance, these pivotal changes, these pivotal moments where these countries are experiencing or are trying to transiting from war to democracy or from authoritarianism to democracy, how these movements can, to some extent, change the sort of outcomes that you are observing for these cases.
Thank you. We can take two more. If there's no question, I have one. So the example you gave of Senegal was really interesting for me, Senegal and Francophone Africa in general. And I wanted to know, because in Senegal, our national land, domain law that we call Loi sur le domaine national, as you mentioned, dates from 1964. And since then, every year, with every regime, we are trying to reform it. But there is resistance from the political leaders because they feel like it's a powder keg, maybe, because there are so many stakes and so many stakeholders that have intentions between their stakes, that each new government, each new regime resists reforming the land law. Even if there have been processes, there is a draft of land law reform, but they can't just implement it, or they can't just adopt it to finalize it and adopt it. So I wanted to know the role in Francophone Africa of legal pluralism in that. I didn't hear you mention it at all, but I just wanted to know if there is any implications, those that you mentioned in terms of redistribution, investment, and so on, that are because of the legal pluralism, even if it's not. I know people who still refer to customary land rights, even if we have a national, even if we have a law. You mentioned gestion des terroirs, so I just want to know how that plays out. Thank you. Do we have Lorenzo? who has a question. Please go ahead, Lorenzo.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much, Professor Amanor, for the fantastically insightful seminar as ever. Always a really important learning experience to listen to you and to read your work. I particularly enjoyed the way in which you charted the ideational roots of the wave of law reforms, of land law reforms in the continent, and contrasting that with the principles or the aims of the earlier waves of reform, particularly post-independence, and the greater emphasis they placed on issues of distribution, land to the tiller, etc. I would have a couple of questions to sort of hear more your thoughts on. I suppose one is about the sort of neoliberal blueprint that you've been charting in the wave of reforms from the 1990s onwards. And I suppose one question I have is the relationship that you see between general or global trends as they affected each country that was undergoing reform, be it development discourses, international financial institutions, etc. And also some of the academic thinking itself that you cited in the seminar, versus sort of country-specific factors or forces, and how those sort of shaped a degree of diversity in the reforms that came out. I'm thinking, for example, of countries that were coming out of conflict and were looking at land reform as a route to peace building. Which is a set of, raises a number of issues that perhaps were not also present in other countries, or the different balances of power that existed and exist between traditional authorities and the state and other actors, if you're looking at Ghana and Zambia, or if you're looking at other countries, for example. So that's one aspect I would be interested in finding out about. And one aspect that I would also welcome your thoughts on is about the inequalities that you mentioned within so-called communities and within customer systems more generally, and also the concentration in the agribusiness sector that you also discussed in your talk. But also reflecting on the fact that some of these reforms, depending on the country, have now been there for 30 years. And the context in the country has changed a lot, including in relation to land holdings, meaning that perhaps some assumptions that were made when the reforms were adopted might no longer hold. I remember at the time there was a lot of talk of land distribution not being an important issue in sub-Saharan Africa, with the exception of former settler colonies where you have that problem. Whereas perhaps looking a little bit more closely at how land holdings have been changing in the context of value chains such as cocoa, which you mentioned, and also other value chains, whether that also raises issues about distribution in a new light, they might perhaps raise a number of questions that would warrant discussion in the context of new reforms to be developed. Anyway, a couple of I would have more questions, but I think if you have the time to just elaborate your thoughts and your thinking on those aspects, that would be absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much again. And sorry about my voice. Unfortunately, I'm not feeling super well, but yeah, that's great to be able to.
No worries. So thank you so much, Lorenzo. I see that we have Walter and Newman Tekwa. So if you can just take one final question, maybe on Zimbabwe. Walter, do you have a question? Or is there anything you would like to say to Prof Amanor? Sorry for putting you on the spot.
I've just joined. Good to see you, Prof. I've just joined, so I'm not really sure the direction of where the discussion is talking. So I prefer not to. Just happy to be here to get the final session of. But I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
I couldn't make it earlier. I was stuck in another engagement. Sorry.
Thank you for joining us. So, Prof, please go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, great set of questions, and not easy to answer. one of the ways I've found recently useful in trying to conceptualize democracy in social democracy in relation to land relations is to go back to Mamdani's thesis on citizen and subject, yeah. But to recast it into a political economy context, yeah. So Mamdani argues that the two tasks facing the post-colonial regimes was to de-racialize was one, the de-racializing the native authorities. Sorry, to de-racialize the administration. And the second was to de-tribalize the native authorities. Yeah. So to transfer the integration of where he puts it in terms of rural and urban. But I think if we shift it to the peasantry or smallholder agriculture, to transform the rights of smallholders, of farmers from one of being subjects to a customary authority or a native authority, to being citizens with full citizen rights. Yeah. And that in the transition to independence, the first task was carried out, the de-racialization of civil society. But the second task, the de-tribalization, the accordance of full citizen rights to rural people was not achieved. Yeah. And so in the context of land, this then is about the types of rights that rural people held and their capacity to fully participate in the course of development. Yeah. And in the presentation, whilst I looked at those, I gave instances of areas in which there were attempts to introduce land reforms. Yeah. I wasn't suggesting that this was a dominant trend throughout Africa. Yeah. But that in many societies that continue to be the case, that full rights were not accorded to rural people. Yeah. And so in terms of land cadastres, yeah, it enabled the rich, the wealthy, the urban to register their lands. But the poor continued to hold user rights. Yeah. And the first process ultimately undermines the second, because as the holdings of expand of commercial agriculture expands, it results in threats to smallholder agriculture. Yeah. So those problems which were identified by people like Lipton and Bates in the literature do have a basis. Yeah. But the basis of inequality in the post-colonial setting, it wasn't an inequality of state imposed on a peasantry, because the state often acted in the interest of a commercial class with which it was allied. Yeah. But the commercial class was not the problem with this kind of analysis. It makes the commercial developments to be part of the political developments. It doesn't examine the relationship between the state, national capital, and international capital. And often the state was acting in the interests of development of both national and agrarian capital. Yeah. So while that was accurate, the solution this solution failed to develop a comprehensive analysis, yeah, because the analysis was placed in the context of state versus peasantry, not in the context of the expansion of commercial agriculture, both as estate agriculture and as agribusiness. Yeah. And this expansion led to a differentiated rural economy. Yeah. So the community didn't reflect it didn't reflect a single class interest, but it reflected a site of class interests in which various sectors would appeal to different political factions, to the states, to further their interest within the community. And what happened following the good governance reforms was that you now had a plurality of factions, of political factions. Yeah. But these factions had to work within the constraints on conditionalities. So they didn't offer a range of solutions. Yeah. They would merely offer the same solution. And so and since they offered the same solution, they could not meet the tasks faced by the most oppressed, who required new forms of who required redistribution, new forms of social distribution. Yeah. So in effect, what good governance did was to deny the plurality of interests in the community. And at the same time, prevent the emergence of a plurality of different political programs based on different class alliances and different visions of the future. So in effect, what happened was you had a stagnation, yeah, that there were no dynamic political discourses, debates about the nature of change, yeah, within civil society. And similarly, at the community, there was a lack of political discourse, because the community now became defined as representing the communal and customary interests of the people. So this facilitated the resurgence of traditional authorities. And kind of monolithic definitions of community interests. And what essentially happened was that the community now began to represent the elite interests that managed to reconstruct and define what the community was and what it stood for. So, for instance, in the Ghana Constitution, the 1992 Constitution, so that's the constitution under neoliberal governance. The Constitution recognizes chiefs as so it goes back to the whole colonial framework of chiefs as being custodians of the community and as the rightful owners of land. And it even accords what share of revenues they gain. So any attempt to oppose this within communities, to challenge the authorities of chiefs, now challenges the national constitution and the government, yeah. And this is a very difficult line for rural people and rural movements to develop, yeah. So they're likely to come up against the state and the the coercive, the military and police forces within the state. Yeah. So the nature of post-reform democracy becomes extremely problematic. In which to develop alternatives to the dominant discourses on governance. On what constitutes democracy and what constitutes community and civil society. And these are all articulated in a framework in which they represent both social and economic objectives. Yeah, they represent. So good governance is efficient economic managed transparency and the rights of people to vote for parties that embody those qualities. The other problem is that civil society. The other problem with the notion of civil society. So civil society becomes increasingly commodified. Yeah. So in the 1970s, yeah, social movements, youth movements, student youth movements and things. Carried out, came together and developed political and social objectives on the basis of their own personal commitment. But from the 1980s onwards, civil society became a sector which was funded by international capital. Yeah. So increasingly, social and political commitments were financially rewarded and influenced by financial considerations. Yeah. So if people developed a social ideal, yeah, instead of coming together to attempt to realize it, they say, okay, that's an excellent idea. Now let's form an NGO and let's try to get financial support for it. Yeah. So all these tendencies have tended to produce a political conformity, yeah, and a political conformity with the structures of good governance and the economic reforms it prescribes. Yeah. And this not only occurs at the community level, yeah, in which increasingly farmers' organizations are shaped by the platforms of multinational corporations and donors, but also at the national level, in which government policy occurs within a framework of public-private partnership, in which government policy is informed by international capital. And it also occurs in academic and civil society discourses, yeah, in which research is funded and shaped by similar international forces. Yeah. So what appears to be democratic is pretty much universal conformity to a prescribed agenda. Shaped by neoliberal forces. However, while these developments are shaped by international capital, yeah, they also depend upon national histories of national histories which preceded these developments. So we can't ascribe it all to an international framework. So, for instance, if we take the shape of present-day land administration in Ghana, the resurgence of traditional rule precedes the introduction of neoliberal reforms, of the structural adjustment program. So if I was to trace this historically, the first phase occurs before independence, yeah. So following the demonstrations and riots of 1948, which made demands for the removal of indirect rule and chiefly of authority. This was fiercely resisted by sectors of the Gold Coast or Ghana national elite, yeah. So the commission of inquiry that came to define the structure of local government, yeah. was largely represent the interest of an alliance of chiefs and the dominant elite. And in many instances, these are very closely related class. They form parts of the same family. Yeah. So after independence, the local government reforms which were introduced were still dominated by chiefs who had the right to elect 1/3 of representatives. And after the demise of the Nkrumah regime, there was an increasing strengthening of chiefs following that too. So by the time that reforms began to be introduced in the 80s, following the economic decline of the state and its inability to provide a social infrastructure, social and physical infrastructure for large part of the population, chiefs had begun to become more assertive and play larger roles in defining local development agendas. Yeah. And I think these type of developments were prevalent in many countries. Yeah. So what happened was, following independence, a reluctance to introduce radical reforms, yeah, led to an between state growing commercial sectors and traditional rulers, yeah. And as the state began to weaken in the 70s and in the crisis of the late 70s and 80s, these forces of conservatism began to develop, began to become much more articulate in formulating a national democratic and development agenda. And then these trends were also taken up by the main forces of neoliberal reforms, yeah, which tend to more conservative, which also tend to conservative forms of development in their bid levels, yeah. And these have become increasingly consolidated in the expression of both market liberalism, private public sector participation, and development objectives. Yeah, but these development objectives essentially result the result in an increasing alliance between the national political class and international capital, in which to extract surplus from a rural population and rents by the international class, by the national elites. Yeah. And ultimately this undermines a large number of rural people who don't have any political constituency under the present political dispensations. Yeah. So where political regimes attempted to stand against this agenda to promote to promote forms of national and economic development that sought to limit expansion, sought to limit international capital expansion within the local economy, or sought to redistribute land rights. These kind of regimes came up against the international order, yeah. And so those kind of, as I think, like Abraham's documents, many regimes find themselves between a rock and a hard place. If they opposed international prescriptions, then they found themselves sanctioned or denied finances. And if they accepted them, they found themselves unpopular with the masses and growing mass discontent. Yeah. So in the end, we end up with a solution which is not really democratic. Yeah. Or it embodies a very corrupt form of democracy. So where does legal pluralism fit into this? Well, I think that legal pluralism, it results from I would see legal pluralism as resulting from the failure to develop a political and social agenda that meets the needs of rural people, and which results in a new society which gives them truly democratic rights, or yeah, which gives them a security of livelihood, security of education, rights to social services, yeah. And reconstructs and integrates them into national life as, in Mamdani's words, subjects rather than as citizens. And this dichotomy of citizen and subject result in two kind of land rights. Yeah. So you have the full rights to land ownership, but which were accorded colonial citizens. Yeah. And user rights, which were accorded to the peasantry under colonial system. And under independence, the individual rights were extended to the commercial classes, those able to invest, but the peasantry still retained its lack of full rights. Yeah. So the end result is a multiplicity of rights in land existing within the national state. Okay, I think I've rambled on a bit.
Thank you so much, Prof, for this very, very insightful presentation, and the brilliant responses you also provided to the questions that were asked. I think you can all join me, all participants, in congratulating Prof Amanor. This was really insightful. It was, yes, a masterclass. So thank you so much, Prof, for your time, for your scholarship, for your generosity. We do not take it for granted. Thank you for joining us for this seminar. We will be recording it and we'll be sharing the recording with all those who wanted to make it but couldn't, such as my co-convener, Colin Marks, who couldn't make it. So thank you so much again. We really appreciate it. Thank you. Please, another round of applause. Those who are in the room and those who are not with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Rama, too.
Thanks so much to you for joining us. I have just shared in the chat the link, Eventbrite link for the next seminar, which will be on the 12th of January with Dr. Johannes Banier, who is with the University of the Free State in South Africa. And his presentation will be on, is titled, "This is God's Land, Land Seizures, and as a Mechanism of Land Access for Peri-Urban Farming Among Malawian Migrants in Zimbabwe." And in January, we also have another seminar with Dr. Elena Perez Nino, who is with the ISS Erasmus University Rotterdam. And her presentation will be on contract farming in Southern Africa and the global gig economy, land, labor, and the workings of merchant capital. So you are all very welcome to join us. Please do not hesitate. If you have any question or if you want to join the study group, you are all welcome. You can send me an email or send an email to Colin Marks, and we will be very glad to welcome you into this new, into our new study group. Thank you so much for staying beyond the time. It was so inspiring that we didn't feel the time flying. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Prof. And see you all again in January. I wish you a very restful festive season. Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye. Prof, if you want to stay just a minute, that would be great. Okay. Thank you so much, Prof. This was excellent. I was just taking notes. The whole seminar, I was just taking notes. It was really, 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 Excellent. And I'm so sorry we didn't have much more people. You know, it's the end of term.
Yeah.
People are marking essays and so on. So many of them have presented their apologies and have asked me to record it so that it can be shared with them. But really, thank you so much. I wanted to ask you if what you are planning to do with this paper, is it something you already submitted, or what are your plans?
Actually, yeah, I'm trying to. I'm not sure yet. Anyways, bits of it have been. Some of them are published, and some bits of it are published.
Okay.
But I'm trying. I've been thinking about trying to write a book on.
Okay. Yes. Yes, that's what Cathy was saying, Catherine Boone.
Yeah.
This is really, really like, I'm not sure if you had a chance to watch the video of Professor Ruth Ohl's seminar.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I'll do that.
I'll send you the link on WhatsApp. But really, your two presentations seem to complement each other. And thank you so much. And yeah, I'll send you all the events and keep you in our mailing list. And also for that project we discussed, there will be a second round, you know, the collaborative projects.
Oh, okay, yeah.
There will be a second round this January. So I will be sharing it with you in case we can, yeah, sorry.
Well, anyway, now my contract has been renewed for this year.
Okay. Sorry,
Yeah,
I saw someone was still in the room. I just removed them.
Pardon?
I saw someone who was still in the room. I just removed them.
Okay.
Yes. So yeah, if everything is sorted, then we can think about it for the start of the year.
Yeah.
If we want to do something, it will be, I think, over 6 months collaborative project. Maybe just to organize a workshop or just small grants for some research.
Yeah. That workshop, yes. You were talking about having a workshop in Dakar. That sounded.
Yes, that would be great. If we can do it, I think we can. Dakar or Ghana, it's really up to you. We can see what works best, or even Edinburgh. But I think Africa would be better for the costs and everything. Yeah. So let's discuss in January. If I have more updates about it, I'll send it over the holidays, but I'll try not to make you work during the December holidays. Thank you so much.
I was rambling a bit at the end. Yeah.
No worries. I didn't want to interrupt you because everyone was just sitting down and listening. We were all listening, so we were all captivated. So I waited until it was 30 minutes beyond. We were planning to finish at 2:30. Now it's
okay. I thought it was one. Sorry, I thought it was 1 hour of questions.
No, it was 40 minutes, but that's fine. Really, it was excellent. So thank you so much. I should have stopped the recording earlier.